All new episodes of Game Graveyard. Weekdays on RatedEm.
Sega is home to some of the biggest franchises in the gaming space. Whether it's Yakuza, Persona, Sonic, or any of the Hatsune Miku games, chances are that you or someone you know loves a Sega series. However, Sega has plenty more series in their catalog that have seemingly been forgotten about. In today's episode of So What Happened To, we're taking a look at these forgotten franchises and finding the answers as to why they've been left behind. Nights is an action flying game series that got its start on the Sega Saturn in 1996. The first game was Nights into Dreams. Players would fly around levels, collecting orbs and defeating enemies within a given time limit. While it was praised heavily for being a one-of-a-kind game, it was an opinion held by a small crowd, as Nights was not a commercial success. There was a spin-off called Christmas Nights, and that game failed to garner attention as well. If anything, it performed worse than the original game because even fans deemed it as unnecessary. It had identical gameplay, it was just a Christmas coat of paint on each stage. The series wouldn't receive a new entry until the Wii with a sequel to the original game called Nights Journey of Dreams. While the updated graphics and expanded story were appreciated, the rest of the game failed to live up to the first one. Reviewers gave it average scores compared to the more positive 8s and 9s the original game received, mainly noting that the gameplay was too ingrained in its 90s roots and the Wii controls were just too cumbersome. Although the dev team has shown interest in making a third title, it's unlikely that Sega will grant them the opportunity unless some drastic changes are made to its gameplay. The repeated history of poor sales is also a likely factor as to why it's not a priority to the company. Shenmue is an iconic action-adventure series that blends hand-to-hand combat with life simulation gameplay. Following a teenager named Ryo Hazuki's journey on avenging his father's murder, the game has the player engage in martial arts combat, hone their fighting skills, and engage in side quests and other casual, less violent activities around its open world. Shenmue 1 released on the Dreamcast, and Shenmue 2 found a home on the original Xbox, and both games were praised for their deeply detailed world and gameplay. Many consider these games to be some of the greatest of all time. However, after Shenmue 2 in 2001, it wouldn't be until 18 years later in 2019 where players would see Shenmue 3. This long wait between games would be the series' detriment, as the hype for the series had died off within that time frame. In addition to general interest fading, the gaming landscape had changed drastically, and Shenmue 3 failed to adapt. Similarly to Nights Journey into Dreams, Shenmue 3 felt dated and lackluster, and the 18-year-long wait between 2 and 3 only added salt into the wound. Critics and fans both lamented the game, and it ultimately showed a disinterest in the series for Sega. Golden Axe was an arcade beat-em-up developed by Sega mainly around the late 80s and into the 90s. The series takes place in a fantasy world where players fight through waves of monsters to eventually put an end to the game's villain, Death Adder. It's very similar to Final Fight or the TMNT arcade game. The first game would have its own cabinet before later being ported to the Genesis, and the second game would drop exclusively on the Genesis. Golden Axe 1 was well received and considered a staple of the beat-em-up genre. The second game was met with a mixed reception, as some thought it was just as good as the first, while others expected more of a challenge and diversity in gameplay. Golden Axe 3 would also be released for the Genesis, but exclusively on a cartridge in Japan. In North America, it was able to be downloaded through the Sega Channel, an online service available in the mid to late 90s that allowed people to download games to their console through a cable television connection. Golden Axe 3 across all regions was met with an ultimately negative reception, as it failed to innovate upon the gameplay. Players just felt that it was unnecessary. The series would lay dormant after the release of the third game in 1993 until 2008, where the series would finally get a new entry on the PS3 and Xbox 360 in the form of Golden Axe Beast Rider. Sort of being a reboot, the game included all the original characters and some gameplay from the original titles, but would ultimately swap out the side-scroller beat-em-up gameplay for a fully 3D hack-and-slash game. The tone changed drastically, moving from a classic fantasy setting to better fit the trend of grungy, quote-unquote realistic games of the time, like Jak 2 and Warrior Within of years prior. Tons of gore, partial nudity, and a muted color palette cemented it as nothing like the fans had ever seen before, for the worse. Nobody wanted Golden Axe to take a mature, gritty route. Take into account the game's clunky controls and lackluster set pieces, environments, and story, and you've got a game that pleased nobody. Many reviewers gave it very low scores, unfortunately tarnishing the series and delivering the final nail in the coffin.
Need a new form of entertainment in your life? Join the thousands of others who have considered subscribing. Side effects may include joy, laughter, and newfound knowledge about video games. Talk to your doctor about if subscribing is right for you.
Want to support the channel? Be sure to share this video with your friends. Rated M episodes are made possible by viewers like you. Thank you.
Jet Set Radio is a cult classic releasing on the Dreamcast in the year 2000. The game has players traverse around a futuristic Tokyo and spray graffiti around the city. The first game was very well received, both in its gameplay and visuals. Many other games have taken inspiration from the design of both of these principles, such as Insomniac's Sunset Overdrive or Team Reptile's Lethal League. In 2002, Jet Set Radio Future was released, a sequel to the original game. It retained its gameplay and art style, but with a upgraded graphical fidelity and some quality of life changes to the core gameplay. Although it didn't perform terribly, it wasn't as popular as the first game. It also was released solely on the original Xbox with no other ports, aside from it later being backwards compatible on the 360. After the sequel, the team expressed interest in doing a third game, but Sega was just simply not interested. Much later, in the 2010s, a pitch was made by a third-party developer named Dinosaur Games for Jet Set Radio Evo. Unfortunately, Sega also expressed disinterest in this pitch as well. In 2022, Sega announced numerous of their older IPs would receive new entries in their series, with Jet Set Radio being one of them. However, very little has been made public about this upcoming game. So while the series isn't entirely dead, it's still considered stagnant. Virtua Cop was a series of light gun games starting in the mid-90s and continuing all the way up until 2003. Mainly being arcade cabinet games, there were also a few home console releases as well. The first game was released in arcades in 1994 and later got a Sega Saturn port in 1995. As mentioned, it was a light gun game, but stood out from others in the genre for its 3D graphics and interactivity. If you shot somebody in the arm, their body would react accordingly as opposed to shooting them in the leg. Virtua Cop 2 improved upon the first game's core gameplay mechanics, but didn't really introduce anything new. It got ports on the Sega Saturn, Windows PCs, and the Dreamcast. Virtua Cop 3 expanded upon the formula, introducing a bullet time mechanic, as well as alternate weapons with real-life names, like the H&K G36C or the Benelli M4. Although the game wasn't bad, arcades were going out of fashion as consoles had safely secured their spot in the gaming industry. Virtua Cop 3 wasn't ported to any consoles after its cabinet release. There was going to be an original Xbox port, but it just wasn't financially feasible to release a light gun accessory with every copy of the game. Unfortunately, due to these factors, Virtua Cop hasn't seen a new entry since the third installment. Alex Kidd was the mascot of Sega long before Sonic the Hedgehog. The platformer series started in 1986 with the release of Alex Kidd in Miracle World for the Master System. It originally started out as a tie-in game for the legendary Dragon Ball series, but the owners backed out and Sega was forced to turn the game into an original IP. A cool fact I found in my research was that the game obviously had a cartridge release, but later versions of the Master System had it built into the console itself. There were numerous sequels from 1986 all the way up until 1999, the last release being Alex Kidd in Shinobi World. After that, Sega fully focused on Sonic as their main IP. In 2021, Miracle World would get a remake in the form of Alex Kidd in Miracle World DX, but the hype was just not there and the game received mediocre reviews. So that was just a few forgotten Sega franchises. If you want to see a video about forgotten franchises of a company I haven't covered yet, feel free to leave a suggestion in the comments below.